Coppinger.
Thank you, Lascian Corla. Minister, last week in Leaders' Questions, I asked the Taoiseach if he agreed that the housing crisis was the most pressing issue in this country right now, and I asked him to declare a housing emergency. This week, Minister, I'd like to put those same questions to the Labour Party, because the Taoiseach didn't declare a housing emergency, but people might expect a different response from the Labour Party. But earlier on, I was a bit concerned you called it a problem. This is much more than a problem, Minister, and it's time for the Labour Party to come out and say it is a homeless emergency. Now, Fine Gael have never been big proponents of social housing or pretended even that they cared about working class people. But the Labour Party did pretend, and it holds the ministry dealing with homelessness and housing. Now today, Minister, there are 2 women in the public gallery who are homeless. I would like if you'd look up and acknowledge them, please. Thank you. If you'd look up and acknowledge them. And the reason being, last week there was 15 families from Dublin West who are homeless. Maybe your colleague from Dublin West might show some concern as well if you can get off your phone for a moment. And they certainly didn't feel that the Taoiseach acknowledged their presence here in any way when they were here. So I'd just like at least that the people who are elected might listen to what they have to say. Now, these are just 2 young women caught in the grip of the homeless tsunami that was being spoken about. But unlike a tsunami, this isn't a natural disaster. It's a direct result of the policies of neoliberalism, of the slashing of expenditure on social housing by 84% from 2008 to 2013, and by the failure of this government to deal with rocketing rents and repossessions. It's a lethal brew that led to one of these young women having nowhere to go up until about 5 p.m. last night. She didn't know where she would be, whether she could bring her baby son with her, and in the event she couldn't. Now, tomorrow this woman has been told to travel 25 kilometres away from her base, where her family are, with no transport. Do you think that this is acceptable? Does the Labour Party Minister have any different position on housing to Fine Gael? If you could clarify that today. If it does, why is the government's housing strategy so heavily dependent on sweeteners for private landlords and private developers? The one thing you didn't mention in your earlier contribution when questioned by Fianna Fáil was the word building and houses. You talked about procurements, you talked about voids, it's not additional housing to the social housing stock, and you talked about modular prefabs, modular homes. You never even spoke about building local authority homes.
Thank you, Deputy.
Can you tell us what will be built? This year, Minister, there was 20 local authority houses and 117 for housing associations. If that continues, it will be 500 for the year. Is this the record and legacy of the Labour Party? And Minister, did you hear the spokesperson from Simon this morning, basically outlining on Morning Ireland that the number of houses available for people to rent on rent allowance is at an all-time low? It's dropped by 25% in availability. And you seem to think that HAPS, RAS and all the other schemes based on private ownership of homes will work.
Thank you.
And that spokesperson said there's a lot done about private housing, little about social housing. Local authorities need to go back to the business of building houses for people. Do you agree with that, Minister, or not?
Minister.
Yes, I do agree with the last point that the Deputy made. Not very much else, but I do agree with the last point that local authorities do have to return to building houses, and that is a critical element of the government's approach and the Minister's approach to addressing this issue and to actually solving this issue rather than simply just talking about it. So in 2015, some 7,400 new social housing units are targeted for delivery, with a further 8,400 through the housing assistance payment. Since the strategy was published by the Minister, as I mentioned earlier, €493 million has been allocated to local authorities and approved housing bodies for the construction I say the building, I use the word building as the Deputy asked me to use, the building and acquisition of over 3,000 units up to 2017. In addition, over €91 million worth of housing investment across a range of housing schemes to bring vacant social housing units back into productive use, which the Deputy appears to perhaps poo-poo, but clearly it's an important aspect of what we need to do, to improve housing for people with disabilities, which is critically important, and retrofitting homes to improve energy efficiency, which is extremely important in the context of energy poverty. So these are practical decisions and practical approaches that have been taken by this government. And, you know, in relation to the housing assistance payment, there are now some 4,000 households in receipt of HAP. It's available in 13 local authority areas, and more are now being planned. The Urban Regeneration and Housing Act, the 2015 Act, was commenced with effect from the 1st of September of this year. And that Act revises the earlier arrangements, the previous arrangements on social and affordable housing, to maximise the delivery of social housing units, the building and the construction of social housing units. Also in relation to financing social housing, we brought forward a significant exchequer kickstart of €2.2 billion, which is put in place for Budget 2015. These are practical decisions that have been made by this government to resolve this problem. And work is already underway on site selection for a €300 million PPP programme for 1,500 social housing units. Again, the building and the construction of social housing units, Lascan Corla. Work is progressing on a strategic housing fund, €400 million of public investment for the acquisition and development of social housing. The Social Housing Proposals Clearinghouse Group, which was established under the strategy, is looking at investment proposals and examined something of the order of 25 proposals to date. So we are working on this. We are delivering on this agenda. Yes, it is a serious question, a serious issue for the government, and absolutely is being addressed in that context. We are returning, and we need to return to the building of social housing by local authorities. That is absolutely right. But we also need to ensure that where possible, and I think it is possible, that we bring the private sector element of this and the private sector contribution to this into play as well. So there's action taking place on all fronts, not just talk, but action.
Deputy Ruth Coppinger.
Well, Minister, this is 4.5 years, all this talk. Too late for the families that are suffering. And I can tell you, it's 4.5 years too late for the Labour Party to turn their attention to this issue. The lack of supply that you spoke of. In 1975, just to reiterate the type of house building that used to take place in this country, there was 8,794 council houses built. I've just told you this year there will be 500 built in this country. How can you sit there and talk about the Labour Party taking this seriously? And Minister, you didn't answer the question, which was very, very clear at the start. Does the Labour Party feel that this is an emergency or not? Or do you think it's just a problem? Will you please answer that in your sum-up? With regard to the allocation of €37 million in Dublin, how many houses will that actually build? Does that include the hotels? Does it include the modular homes and all of the other emergency accommodation measures, or is that just home building? And can I just say something about modular housing? I can understand how some families might feel that that's an alternative for them, better than being stuck in hotels, travelling miles to school, with no food, proper food and cooking. However, a modular home in 4 months you're talking about. You could be building houses in 3 months. A house doesn't take much longer than 3 or 4 months to build. The key problem is planning. And if you used, for example, NAMA, if you really thought it was an emergency, you'd be coming in here, sorry Minister, if you don't mind, introducing emergency legislation to allow you to acquire the land that does exist. NAMA has 1/3 of all the land in Dublin, for example, and you'd be building houses and you'd be fast-tracking social and affordable houses.
Thank you, Deputy.
Rather than relying on modular homes. And Minister, I would just say this to you. Fine Gael obviously don't give a toss about people in social housing. But actually, this is something.
Please.
You might not make a show of yourself now shouting over me.
Okay. No, Deputy Coppinger, to conclude,
thank
please.
you. But Minister, I would say this to you. The fact that the Labour Party has left this till weeks, potentially, or even months before a general election, you've made a serious, serious error. This is permeating now through working class communities and even middle income communities. Many people who are stuck paying $1,700, $1,800 in rents. You've made a serious error here. But can you please just answer, if you believe it's an emergency, what are you going to do about actual building of houses?
Minister, to conclude.
Well, first of all, Lachlan Corla, as you will appreciate, I'm very happy at any time to answer for my party, the Labour Party, and very proud to do so. But I'm here representing the government today. I'm responding on behalf of the government. Now, the deputy opposite likes to mention my party, and I don't know, if you did a word search on her contribution there, you'd probably find it about 10 times. She's completely obsessed with the Labour Party, completely obsessed. But I'll tell you the difference between me and her, and my party and her outfit over there. I'll tell you what the difference is. Instead of actually engaging in ridiculous stunts in order to actually get ourselves into the papers, into court and into the papers, we take practical steps to address the issue facing the working people that she claims to be so concerned about. She postures just like the two people beside her in the chamber. They posture and posture and posture. But problems, social problems, are there to be solved, not to be leveraged for political gain. And that is what the three members up at the top do day in, day out. They oppose every single practical measure on the question of modular housing. And all of the people who are involved in the debate, all of the NGOs, all see a great contribution that can be made by modular housing. What about Deputy Coppinger and her colleagues? They flew in the face, inexplicably, Lachlan Corla, flew in the face of all the housing campaign and advocacy groups that are out there by opposing the immediate rollout of 150 units of modular housing that are so urgently needed. They talk about an emergency. They went into the chamber in Dublin City Council and they voted against it. Now, that is not politics. That is hypocrisy, absolute hypocrisy. So the difference, since they're so obsessed with the Labour Party, I can tell them this through you, Lachlan Corla. The difference is that we see a necessity to solve social problems. We don't believe that social problems are, as it were, a godsend for political recruitment. We see them as something to be solved, and that is what we are doing.
Thank you. That concludes leaders' questions, and shortly we'll go on to